Welcome to English 4E, Class 16, assignments K22 and K23, taught by Jill Percy. I am so sorry for the delay. We were having internet difficulties and couldn't get on. I hope everyone is out there. If you missed it, don't worry. We'll just kind of try and condense things and get things going here. My normal contact info, the big thing is my email is jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. And please send assignments to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. All right, today's work. Oh, wait, that is not correct. Hang on. Okay, we're going to move on to here. This is an overview of Unit 2, which we're starting today. On the surface, it looks as if there are 8 questions plus a culminating activity. However, key question number 23 has reading questions for every chapter, and key question number 24 has chapter reflections for 6 of the chapters. So those questions are going to take a little bit longer to complete. So it opens up with a description and the expectations that we are meeting from the Ontario curriculum. And then we've got activity 1, which is talking about vocabulary development, guided reading questions, and then chapter reflections. And those you may end up kind of working on throughout the unit because there's quite a bit of that. Then we're looking at conflict, cause and effect, descriptive paragraph writing, writing a character sketch. Then we are looking at a media production of Never Cry Wolf, which is by Farley Mowat, a very famous Canadian writer. And we're looking at researching in response to that in the company of wolves and understanding in media work. And then we have a culminating activity where we reflect on the story. At the very end of this unit, there is a glossary. It is really important in order to be able to do key question number 22 for vocabulary development. And then there's a checklist to make sure that you've got everything done. Okay, so this unit is designed to help you investigate human experiences through the study of character and theme. You will apply the literary terms introduced in Unit 1, and you will see a variety of reading strategies to understand the key elements of a novel, including setting, character, theme, and conflict. The novel to be studied is entitled Where the Rivers Meet by Dawn Sawyer, and you will also examine Never Cry Wolf as a media work. So there are 4 expectation categories in Ontario. The first one is knowledge and understanding. Then we've got thinking and inquiry, communication, and then application. In other words, how you apply everything that you have learned. Okay. Okay, so here's an overview of the expectations that we will be meeting. The capital letters at the end, like you see a little K in brackets, it refers to which category that expectation is under. So a K for knowledge, an I for inquiry, a C for communication, and an A for application. So during this unit, we are going to read and demonstrate understanding of a novel, demonstrate an understanding of the elements of a novel, identify and explain the effects of specific elements of style in a novel, use knowledge of vocabulary and language conventions to speak, read, and write clearly, correctly, and competently for specific purposes and audiences. Use a variety of print and electronic sources to gather information and explore information for your written work. Revise your written work collaboratively and independently with a focus on support for ideas, accuracy, clarity, and coherence. Edit and proofread to produce final drafts using correct grammar, spelling, and punctuation according to the conventions of standard Canadian English specified for this course, with the support of print and electronic resources when appropriate. Okay, so you should have hopefully gotten this novel, Where the Rivers Meet. There is also a digital version of it. If for some reason you didn't get it, please let me know and I can send that to you. So this initial exploration is worth 160 marks. There's a lot of marks in this part. The main purpose of this activity is to provide you with a structured approach to an initial reading of any novel. By the end of this activity, you will have developed an understanding of the novel for this course, developed your vocabulary, and gained insight into the central characters. As mentioned in the description at the beginning of this unit, the novel Where the Rivers Meet will be studied. Some of you at least may have already read this novel at one point or another. If you have done so, hopefully you found it to be an interesting and worthwhile story. It was selected for this reason, and perhaps more importantly, because of the issues contained in it. There will be opportunities for shared reading of the novel during class time if you are doing it with Smart Bridget. Note, We are no longer using Smart Bridget in WASA, so that's unfortunately no longer an option. I will do a little bit of reading just to kind of help people get started on the novel. So there's three main assignments that are related to this novel. And the first one is vocabulary development. You're going to examine a list of words found in the novel. There's a glossary, which is like a mini dictionary, containing these words, and it's provided at the end of the unit. You will be using a thesaurus to find words with similar meaning to those given and writing some sentences. Number two, reading for content. You will answer a series of questions pertaining to the plot or events which take place in the story. And then journal writing. You're going to be keeping a response journal for any 6 chapters in the novel, consisting of a paragraph for each one. Each of these paragraphs must consist of at least 6 sentences. You will have the opportunity to express your opinions, thoughts, and feelings about what you have been reading. Okay, so key question number 22 is vocabulary development, and this part is worth 20 marks. This one meets the expectations for using the knowledge of vocabulary and language conventions to speak, read, and write clearly, correctly, and competently for specific purposes and audiences, and constructing a variety of complete and correct sentences. As you read through Where the Rivers Meet, or any other novel for that matter, you will encounter words where you may or may not know the meaning of. Understanding the vocabulary that an author uses in a novel is important for overall comprehension or understanding of the novel as a whole. Also, through reading, you will be able to develop and expand your vocabulary to apply to your own spoken and written language skills. Oh, okay, so the big thing, and I'm going to introduce all the words, but is basically you need to write 10 sentences. There's going to be a list of words, and it's taken from the novel Where the Rivers Meet. The page where each word is found is given for your convenience, so you can check on it if you want to. It's also grouped by chapter. Please see the glossary section on page 23 at the back of your unit for the meaning of each word. Remember too, though, any words can have more than one meaning. In our glossary, we've kind of picked the one meaning that was most relevant, but be aware that there might be other meanings that could also be related. As you examine each word, think about the context in which it's used in the story. Choose any 10 of the words listed below and write sentences of your own to show your understanding of them. You'll be writing 10 sentences all together, not for each chapter, but over the entire novel. Okay, so here is the beginning. And for me, this table that they created is non-intuitive because you have to read it down rather than across. So in chapter 1, we've got the word resonating, exasperation, and gallantly. Chapter 2, we have impertinent, coward, insidious, insolence, lateral, contemplated, schemes, and oblivious. And then I'm going to pop down to here. Chapter 3, viable, reproachful, emanating, exorbitant, ashran, meandered, disembark, riveting. Here we go. Exuded, intricate, quavering, sulkily, surly, perilously, and preened. I've skipped something. Hang on a second. Oh yeah, no, I know where I am. Solace, parchment, commend, wavering, shimmering, desolate. Ominously, reluctance, derision, ruefully, immense. Grimacing, nonchalant, meager. Frenetic, nimble, careening. Indecipherable, defiance. Apprehensively, vocational. Conceited, acceleration, and amnesty. So I read those because sometimes we're familiar with how a word sounds and we aren't necessarily familiar with its spelling. And so you may actually know the word and go, oh, wait, I know that word. It looks a little different than how I thought, right? So I've grabbed a little tiny bit of the glossary from the back of the book. There's 50 words altogether. Here is just 5 words, okay? So I'm just kind of showing you in case you haven't taken a look at it. So number 1 is resonating. It's on page 1. It's a verb. And the definition is filling a place with sound or producing echoes. Number 2 is exasperation, page 4. Also, this is a noun, greatly annoyed or angered. Gallantly on page 6 is an adverb, bravely or courageously. Impertinent on page 7, an adjective, not showing proper respect. Coward, a verb, crouched or shrank in fear. I want to talk about that one quickly because it doesn't mean coward like you are a coward, like the person. It's talking about somebody who's like cringing or shrinking away from somebody. Picture somebody with their arms up and kind of in front of their face and they're pulling their body away. They're scared. Um, if you find that these aren't as helpful, you can also check a regular dictionary or a thesaurus, and that might help you get a better idea of the meaning of these words. And so here is an example. I'm going to do one together with you guys for practice. The very first word is resonating. It's a verb, filling a place with sound, producing echoes. So I was right in the middle of just grabbing this screenshot. I didn't get a chance to. I'm going to check an online dictionary to see what it says. Let me see if I can do this right now and see how helpful it is. Definition of resonating. Okay, so they've got produce or be filled with a deep, full, reverberating sound. The sound of the siren resonated across the harbor. Or technical, so technical, I'm assuming they mean like scientific, like produce an electrical or mechanical resonance. The crystal resonates at 16 megahertz. So this kind of resonance I would think of as like vibrating in a sense. Okay. So when I checked that originally, I found that it was not that helpful. I'm sorry. Echo, hang on. Sorry, I'm getting distracted here. I ended up checking the thesaurus. The thesaurus gave me some different synonyms: echo, reverberate, resound, sound, re-echo, ring, or roll. And for echo, they have to continue or be repeated in a series of reflected sound waves. Okay. So if I'm going to use this in a good sentence, which is worth 2 marks, I don't want to do something too simple, like write, I hear resonating. For one thing, that is too short. For another thing, resonating is supposed to be a verb. There has to be something doing the resonating. So in the sentence I have written, it sounds like resonating is a noun, like a guitar, like I'm hearing a guitar or I'm hearing a bird. But if resonating is a verb, then there has to be something doing it. So the boom of the fireworks was resonating all over the city. The drum beat is resonating around the concert hall. In both of these sentences, I have used the word as a verb and showed that I understand its meaning from through my sentence. Okay, so if you have your novel, take a quick minute and grab it. This is the foreword, which I kind of wanted to discuss really quickly with you guys. The foreword is written by a man named Art Napoleon. He is of Cree and Dene heritage. And here is what it says. Educators who buy into the current mainstream education system do not usually embrace all of Don Sawyer's ideas. That's the guy that wrote the novel. But even they are often spellbound by his presentation skills and depth of knowledge. It can be difficult, after all, to argue with facts and statistics that have been meticulously researched and presented by an enthusiastic and engaging orator who is not afraid to tackle tough issues facing not just Aboriginal people, but also society as a whole. After attending a couple of lively workshops in the Shuswap and inviting him to my home community of Saulteaux First Nations in northeastern British Columbia, I became his colleague at the Native Adult Education Resource Center run by the Okanagan College in Salmon Arm, BC. This unique and exciting program took us right across Western Canada, providing in-services for adult educators and community developers, conducting research projects and developing innovative curriculum designed specifically for Aboriginal learners. It was my crash course in decolonizing methodologies and my introduction to participatory, student-centered, and community-based programming. I was introduced to concepts of different learning styles through the teachings of educators such as Paolo Freire, and was privileged to work with all of BC's top Indigenous training institutions at the time. As an advocate of community-controlled education, I was in my glory. It was also at the NAERC that I began my own journey of self-discovery, dealing with early childhood trauma, including various forms of racism. Apparently, these demons had been lurking in the recesses of my psyche for decades. Instead of being taken aback, Dawn encouraged me to keep on working while seeking help. Picture a white upper middle class academic gifted in the cognitive realms of the medicine wheel, consoling a big broken down Cree man sobbing on my copy room floor. It's a good thing that our office was not part of the main campus. Despite such difficulties, our services remained very much in demand, and this spoke loudly of the burning hunger for culturally relevant approaches to teaching and learning. Dawn and I developed, sorry, I lost my check there, an effective partnership because, I'm sorry, I have somebody interrupting me over here. Because we reached out to care for one another, each within the confines of our own values and cultural understandings. Dawn didn't try to become Native, and I never tried to become white. Unlike the Lone Ranger and Tonto, we reached across the divide of our differences, and we held each other in an embrace of mutual respect. Despite our differences and occasional headbutting, we became brothers. We were, after all, working on projects that encouraged cross-cultural bridging. These experiences planted the seeds that eventually led me back to my own traditions and spiritual ways. For this, I am eternally grateful. This environment of safety was what I needed to make sense of my personal life and move forward with renewed hope. Where the stories meet is a story about this kind of hope. It is a story about the aftermath of colonialism, racism, and a struggle to overcome enormous obstacles. While set in the BC interior, it's a story that could have happened anywhere in Canada to any Aboriginal community, urban or rural. From the Dene of the West to the Innu of the East, such stories are unfortunately widespread living memories. Whether we choose to deny it or embrace it, a great colonial tragedy has taken place on the lands called Canada. While it didn't take place on our watch, we are left with the collective cultural memory, and it remains as real as ever. It whispers and rumbles through the land from time to time, for the earth remembers, and it does not lie. The collective memory floats through the narrative of where the rivers meet. Nancy Antoine's struggle to deal with this memory and her search for meaning and understanding has served well as an inspiration to Aboriginal youth and adults right across Canada for several decades. Many students have written to Don Sawyer, thanking him for inspiring them to seek out their elders, communities, and traditions for personal guidance and a sense of identity and belonging. Nancy's victimization and subsequent courageous quest have even inspired some readers to tell their own stories for the very first time. May such processes continue until they are no longer needed. Where the Rivers Meet is not another victim story. It is more like a victory song. There is no greater compliment to an artist or writer than to know that their work has touched someone at a very deep and personal level, providing hope and a sense of empowerment. Can there be anything more meaningful as we all do our little parts to move forward from a painful, tragic past towards a more open, honest, and hopeful future? This is by Art Napoleon. He's a well-traveled songwriter, storyteller, performer, and writer born in Moberly Lake, BC, and of Cree and Dene heritage. He is also involved deeply in many Aboriginal educational, cultural, and community development projects. Hang on a sec. Okay, so this novel delves really deeply into the racial divide, inequalities, and prejudice in this one town. However, it is reflective of many small towns in Canada, both in the past and the present. So it touches on difficult topics, including addiction, despair and depression, suicide, and the sense of powerlessness. If at any time this novel is causing you a great deal of grief or depression, I am giving you complete permission in advance to put the novel down, take a break, call a friend, and vent about the injustices that have existed and still exist in Canada. Many people have suffered some of the same problems as in this book and have not yet healed. Please reach out to the people around you to ask for help if depression or despair is overwhelming you. Some possible people to reach out to are mental health workers in your community, noted counselors, treatment centers in your community, and elders. In addition, there are some numbers you can call. There is the Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's toll free, and that one is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, call 911 or the number for emergency services in your community. The ETIG Healing Lodge and Learning Center is at 705-534-3724. Fort Francis Tribal Area Health Services, 807-271-0194. Native Child and Family Services Toronto, 416-969-8510. There's also Talk for Healing, which is specifically geared towards Indigenous women and is available in 14 different languages all across Ontario. That is 1-855-554-HEAL. And then the Wabano Center for Aboriginal Health. Crisis support is available by appointment or walk-in for crisis support 5 days per week, 613-748-0657. There's also the Métis Nation of Ontario's Healing and Wellness branch. Their urgent number is 1-877-767-7572. And they have a bunch of other numbers that are available as well. Okay. So before we start looking at the novel, I'm going to look at the key question. Key question number 23 is about the guided reading questions, okay? And this part is worth 70 marks. It meets the expectations about demonstrating understanding of a text by citing explicit information and ideas from it, using keywords in questions or prompts to organize ideas, information, and evidence in written answers, constructing a variety of complete and correct sentences. The questions which follow will act as a reading guide to help you better understand where the rivers meet. So these questions will explore the elements of setting, character, theme, plot, and point of view. Also, through these elements, issues pertaining to conflicts which arise among the characters will be examined. Conflict is a term meaning a struggle, problem, or a fight of some kind. It can also refer to a disagreement between people with different ideas and beliefs. Conflict of various forms is most definitely evident in this novel. As you read through the novel, answer the following questions on lined paper. This will be an ongoing assignment during this unit, okay? It should be completed by the end of this unit for submission. The number found at the end of each item represents its marks. Like if you see a 2, it means it's worth 2 marks. Furthermore, your responses to these items will range anywhere from 1 sentence to as many as 4 or 5 sentences. The important thing to keep in mind is that all your responses must be in complete sentences. You will be evaluated mainly on the content you provide, but your spelling, grammar, and punctuation will also be taken into consideration. Try to be careful with your spelling. So for chapter 1, here are the questions. What is the setting of this novel? 2 marks. What is Nancy Antoine doing at the beginning of the story? 1 mark. What First Nation does Nancy's people belong to? 1 mark. And then number 4, towards the end of the chapter, Nancy asks George, when are we going to get out of here? I want to leave this place. Why does she ask this? And that's another 2 marks. Okay, hang on a second. If you haven't got your novel, go ahead and grab it. We are looking at chapter 1, and we are on page 1. Okay, I'm going to just read and get us started. Sometimes I find getting the novel going is kind of the hardest part. So here we have the railroad trestle lay across the canyon like a web strung between 2 enormous rocks. Far below the wooden beams of the trestle, the gorge was choked with water boiling between the steep sides. A constant low roar climbed up the canyon walls. Jagged, snow-tipped peaks rose on either side of the river like rows of gigantic wolves' teeth. Nancy Antoine stood silently in the middle of the trestle. Her feet were planted on 2 ties, and between them she could see the tangled river 1,000 feet below her. She rocked towards the edge, catching her balance just before she swayed an inch too far and arched like a diving eagle to the rocks below. She liked the rush of excitement as she swayed forward until she could see the water beyond the dark brown edge of the railroad ties. She studied the water as it boiled through the gorge. It moved with urgency, pulsing and rushing like the blood in her own veins. No matter where she went, even when she had been in Kamloops or Vancouver, she could always hear the roar resonating dully in her ears. She could feel the bridge shudder as the river crashed and swirled around the rocks in its way, slowly, patiently blunting their sharpness. She had always known the river. She lived on a small bench, it says a bench or beach of land that had been leveled by the river thousands of years before, as it ate its way more deeply into the rock. But her feeling for it was more than familiarity. Her memory of the river seemed old, ancient. It was a mute memory, an immensely ancient knowledge of the soul of the river. Though Nancy stood above a single river just a mile and a half east, the waters split into two rivers. The two were separated by Chequa Arrowhead Mountain, and they seemed to sneak up on each other until they rounded the point of the mountain, swirled together, boiling and foaming as they collided. But they didn't mix, at least not immediately. On one side, the clear blue-green water from the north fought off the brown, muddy fingers of the larger river from the east. The whites had their own names for the rivers, but Nancy knew them by the names of her grandmother. The northern river was Kualatqua, Green River, and the broader river was known as Quataquatic, the river that isn't clear. And this place too had its own name, not Creighton as the townspeople called it, but Hepequa, where the waters meet. Nancy turned her head and looked westward, watching as the two rivers continued their struggle in the canyon below. Gradually, the murky waters of the Quetequic absorbed the Kualatqua until at the bend about 5 miles downstream, the river disappeared from sight into a wall of craggy peaks, and there was only a thin emerald line against the north shore. Just like our people, the Susweps, she thought, reduced to a sliver of what they had once been, and she began to rock again, a tiny figure suspended high above the river, swaying like a leaf in the wind. Above the low thunder of the river, a horn honked impatiently. She looked up to see George's battered pickup parked on the road above the tracks on the south side of the bridge. Even from the middle of the trestle, she could see the irregular circles of brown paint surrounding holes rusted through the fenders and doors. The brown splotches against what was left of the green paint gave the truck the look of a well-used World War II surplus vehicle, complete with camouflage. As she watched, George waved and shouted something that was drowned out in the roar of the water. She raised her hand in acknowledgement and started towards the truck. Nancy barely glanced at the ties as she walked slowly across the trestle. Her feet were sure. She had walked the treacherous bridge with its terrifying gaps between the ties many times before. Vaguely, she hoped a train wouldn't come. She thought about the times in the past when she had gotten trapped on the bridge. The first time it had happened, she was only 6. She could remember her father's shout as a train careened out of the trees and thundered onto the bridge. She had quickly lain on the far edge of the ties, as her father had ordered, 1,000-foot drop on one side, the screaming wheels and shrieking whistle of the train 6 inches away on the other. A wave of terror swept through her as she remembered the train rushing by her, the trestle jumping and shaking like a wild horse, intent on throwing her into the chasm only inches away. She'd pressed her face into the ties, aware only of the sharp smell of tar, all sound blocked by the screaming of the wheels as they swept by. She had tried to wrap her legs around the ties to brace against the shaking, and had dug her fingers into the ties until she could feel her skin tearing against the hard wood. Nancy shook her head to try to clear the old memory. That had been the worst time. Later, she'd gotten less and less scared, but she still dreaded the sight of the big orange snout with its single eye hurtling towards her. Even now, she felt her stomach turn soft as she thought about the bridge, shuddering and quivering as the train rolled onto the trestle, its horn blasting a useless warning. With no time to turn back and the sheer drop to the gorge below, there was only the 3 feet of bare tie for refuge. As she walked, she thought about her aunt who had died on the bridge 2 years ago. The engineer said she'd just stood on the side as the train approached. She must have lost her balance, he told the police. Wasn't my fault. What could I do? And the railway certainly wasn't to blame. After the band had written them about the situation, they received a curt reply. Our hands are tied, they wrote. We have posted a sign at each end warning people not to go out on the trestle. If they choose to disregard the warning, we are not responsible for the consequences. The band's suggestion that a simple walkway and handrail be installed was flatly rejected. The expenses would run to several $1,000s, the letter read, and we are under no obligation whatsoever to provide such a facility. After all, she thought angrily, only Indians live over here anyways. So no one was responsible and no one was at fault. And yet, 7 people had died on the bridge over the last few years because the only other way across the river was by a ramshackle ferry that ran 5 miles upstream and closed at 8 in the evening. Nancy felt her bitterness turn into something else, something duller, as she walked the last few feet to the south side of the canyon. It was anger and rage mixed with helplessness, bewilderment, and shame, and it filled her up until she almost choked. Still seething inside, Nancy climbed up the sandy bank towards the waiting truck. Finally, she reached the edge of the broad bench that contained the town and stood on the road. For God's sakes, George called from the side of the truck. Are you in some sort of trance, lady? I thought you were going to camp out there. You're going to be late for school, and I was supposed to be at the mill half an hour ago. Nancy's eyes shifted from the jumble of houses and buildings to George's face, his eyes rolling in exasperation. He was the handsomest man she had ever seen. His deep brown eyes were almost as black as his pupils, giving his clear chestnut skin an even darker cast. His long black hair was pulled back in the usual ponytail and tied near his head with a strip of red cloth. As always, a smile played around his lips. She didn't think she'd ever seen George without a smile. It seemed to dance around his face like a warm flame, lighting up his eyes with a dark glow. Even her silence couldn't put a damper on that flame as she climbed into the truck. Uh-oh, George muttered teasingly. Looks like you're in one of your moods. Don't I even get a kiss? No? Well, I guess making out is out of the question then. She stared steadily at the floor while he snorted and chuckled. You're such a wit, she commented acidly. Why don't you ever clean this thing? And she gestured at the inside of the truck, littered with candy bar wrappers, beer bottles, chocolate milk cartons, and at least a dozen Big Mac containers. Geez, it looks like you've been out stealing trash from McDonald's. Nah, George replied. It's just that the McDonald's stuff is plastic, so it doesn't break down as quickly. See, most of the stuff I've thrown in here gets composted and turned into topsoil. That way, when this old truck has the big one and its spirit heads for the big junkyard of the sky, I can park it out in front of the house and plant turnips in it. Nancy carefully lifted a few layers of trash with the toe of her shoe. Sure enough, tiny green shoots were pushing their way through the debris. I think it's disgusting, she said. Yeah, you're just not into organic gardening, babe. Why, I think I'll try starting individual pumpkin plants in those Big Mac boxes. This thing could become a regular rolling greenhouse. Obviously delighted with his idea, George grinned broadly. Nancy looked out the window as the truck ground into gear and pulled off the sandy shoulder. The old pickup shook and rattled, and the eagle feather tied to the rear view mirror shuddered in sympathy. She slid towards the door, trying to avoid the springs that clawed up through gaping tears in the vinyl upholstery. At some point, the rips had been half-heartedly covered with gray duct tape, but the tape had been no match for the springs and had been quickly thrust aside. It now spread itself across the seat like flypaper just waiting to latch onto unwary posteriors. George reached over to turn on the radio. As he fumbled with a bare stem where a knob should have been, his hand hit a stick that wedged the radio into the hole in the dash. The whole works fell onto the floor, trailing wires like entrails. Nancy shook her head as George tried to replace the radio, turn it on, and drive through town simultaneously. George Thomas, would you look where you're going? Nancy shrieked as the truck lurched straight towards Greb's store window. George looked up, yanked the wheel to the left, and waved cheerfully to a group of tourists who had flattened themselves in terror against the store. Did you see them? George chortled as the truck roared down the street. Man, they thought some crazy Indian had traded his pony in for a truck and was after their scalps. Maybe I should go back and have another run at them. What do you say? Maybe they'll circle up the greyhounds. George, sometimes I think you're out of your mind, Nancy said fiercely. You almost put your truck in Greb's display window, taking 4 innocent bystanders with you, not to mention me, and you think it's all a big joke? Are you going to drive me to school or should I get out and walk? George smiled merrily. School? Oh, yeah, I knew we were headed somewhere. He jammed his foot down on the accelerator, and the old truck, shrieking in dismay, leaped forward like a stung mare. They flew up from the town on the steep road that wound its way to the high school. She could see it now, hanging over the steep canyon like an enormous buzzard perched on the ledge. Nancy had never been able to figure out exactly why the school had been located 2 miles out of town and on the main highway. She had been told once that it was to take advantage of the view. But if that had been the concern, why had the place been built with virtually no windows? Perhaps it had more to do with being close to the heights, the white enclave located just above the highway and as far from the reserve as possible. As they neared the school, the fortress effect became more pronounced. The few narrow windows looked more like gun portals, and the unrelieved gray cinder block construction gave the structure an air of somberness and gloom. Nancy hated the school, not in the same dull, aching way that she hated the town, but with a bright, active hatred that flared up like a flame every time she got near the place. But no matter how much she detested it, she was going to get through it. It was her ticket out. As the truck came to a stop by the drive leading to the school, Nancy put her hand where the indoor door handle should have been, forgetting that it had been gone for years. George laughed and opened his door, holding it open for her and bowing gallantly. She slid over and climbed out. I've got to fix that thing one day, he muttered. Standing beside him, she paused, hooking her arm around his solid waist, and raised herself up to kiss him. George, she said quietly, when are we going to get out of here? I want to leave this place. His smile lost some of its warmth, and his eyes grew hard. He stood staring at the wedge of open sky between the steep sides of the canyon. From here, they could see about 6 miles up the canyon to the west before the mountains closed ranks. Behind them, the two rivers thrust to the north and east, quickly disappearing into the ranges that flanked them. And all around them, the mountains seemed to form a solid, impenetrable wall. George pointed west to the point where the river bent out of sight, and the peaks seemed to join like clasped fingers. His finger traced the ragged boundaries of the canyon eastward, then continued its jagged ellipse around the northern perimeter until he was pointing west again, and he lowered his arm. This is the world. He pointed slowly, barely moving his lips. It begins there and ends there. He seemed to shake himself, and some of the lightness came back into his face. This is my world, he laughed. There's nothing else out there. What kind of nonsense are they feeding you in that place anyway? She looked at him silently for a moment. I mean it, George. We've got to get out. This town is a killer and you know it. Well, right now, I'm more worried about my boss. George smiled, getting back into his truck and slamming the door twice, trying to get it to catch. I know he's a killer and I'm already an hour late for work. See you tonight. The truck squealed off in a spray of gravel and dust, and at the highway, George stopped at the stop sign and opened the door. He stood at the rusty running board and blew her a kiss before wheeling around the turn and heading for the mill. Nancy waved and turned towards the school. So you can already see in the feel of it that obviously there's a lot of racism in this town, and it's affecting even how the children essentially are thinking of themselves. So first question number one is, what is the setting of this novel? Now I'm going to ask you, don't put this in the tiny little spot they've left on that page. Put it on some lined paper so it's neat and easy for me to read. Um, Remember that setting is two concepts. Where is the novel taking place? And when is it taking place? When can be very specific, like a year, or it can be more general, like a possible decade or era, like the Roaring Twenties. At its most basic, is it happening in the past or the future or the present? If it doesn't come out and say when it is happening directly, look for clues such as technology and social trends. What types of phones, computers, cars, or social media is present? Are there any specific events mentioned, like the Great Depression or World War II, that would give you a hint? Where? Sometimes a novel can take place in only one place, it's always in the school or it's always in the forest. It can be even more specific, like MS Hetherington School or Evan Trail Woods. But other times, a novel might be set more generally in a town or a city or a reservation where the characters go to multiple places, such as a school, a store, a playground, or the airport. Novels can also be set in imaginary places such as spaceships or other planets or a made up world. Okay, this is kind of a tougher question than it looks like. What is Nancy Antoine doing at the beginning of the story? Sometimes when you're reading a novel, they're giving you so many tiny details that it can be hard to see the big picture. There's a saying that describes this. He can't see the forest for the trees. The idea is that the person is seeing all the trees, but not getting the bigger idea that all the trees mean this is a forest. There are a lot of details, but all the things that Nancy is thinking and doing at the beginning of the story. Stepping back and looking at the big picture, how would you describe what she is doing? Number three, what First Nation does Nancy's people belong to? I'm going to give you a hint because I read through that chapter several times before I found it. Look on page 2 and you will find the name of her band. All right, number 4. Towards the end of this chapter, Nancy asks George, when are we going to get out of here? I want to leave this place. Why does she ask this? This is a question where you need to use information from the book along with your own ideas and opinions. What are some events, including the memories that she's kind of reliving, that might make Nancy want to leave? What are her opinions about the town, the school, and the people who live there? Think about if you were in her shoes, would you want to leave and why? What's going on so far? Okay, so tomorrow we're going to look at chapter 2 and at key questions number 24. If you want to read ahead, that is fine. I'm sorry, I think I probably talked a little bit fast because I was aware that we were going over time. And I know some people might have to get back to work or be on their lunch break and not be able to finish listening. So I apologize for the delay. It was really beyond my control. There was a town-wide issue of internet outage. Um, thank you so much for joining me today. And I will see you guys tomorrow in class. And hopefully we will not have any internet outages tomorrow. And we will figure out what to do if we do. Um, Please, by all means, send me an email or send me a Facebook message if you're having problems with any assignments. I would be happy to help. Okay, thank you so much, guys, and see you tomorrow.